right, so we are back. It seems like Instagram is cutting me off after about an hour and a half. Or it was that song in that last video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to the video I believe that I froze on, which I think was this one. I'll replay it. Actually, I probably shouldn't, because I don't want to get it cut off again. All right, let's replay this last video.
This fire has been burning for 1,500 years straight. These are the Zoroastrians, an ancient religion that considers fire a sacred symbol. I'm here in Yazd, a very old city in Iran with a still important number of Zoroastrians living here. It is impossible to be converted to this religion, only getting it from family, so their numbers are dwindling against Islam, but still alive and well. Zoroastrians believe that fire, water, and earth are all sacred elements. Because of this, they don't bury their dead in the earth, rather placing their bodies in a large pit on top of a tower like this. Here they will let the birds scavenge the bodies until nothing but bone is left. They put the bones in the center as the final resting place to ensure the body never comes in contact with sacred elements like the earth. This practice has been outlawed in Iran for decades, and now they bury bodies in concrete, but I can't deny it's a bit creepy coming up to this tower knowing what used to be here. Zoroastrians follow 3 core tenets: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. This fire has been burning for 1,500 years.
Okay, pretty cool, man. That's pretty dope that they can keep a fire going that freaking long. All right, so as I was saying, there is religious tolerance. They allowed their subjects to keep their gods, and they restored all their temples. So the law of the Medes and Persians is referenced in Daniel chapter 6, because it referenced how the law of the Medes and Persians cannot be revoked. So this matters prophetically because Babylon was an absolute monarch and Medo-Persia was a legal empire, and the power shifts from personal divinity of the rulers. So basically the Babylonian kings were considered near gods themselves. So it shifts from personal divinity to bureaucratic law, and this is a civilized evolution. So the geographic reach. So at its height, Medo-Persia was at its height under Darius the First. So that went from India, the Indus Valley, through Mesopotamia, Anatolia, which is Turkey, the Levant, which is where the Hebrew tribes were, Egypt, and into parts of Europe. And the largest, that was the largest empire we have in recorded history to date. So the decline of the empire, there was a lot of internal issues with their governing. So there was a lot of court intrigue. There was succession conflicts. There were rebellion in Egypt and Asia Minor. So we're going to watch a couple videos on that.
How did the Persian kings go from ruling the largest empire in history to losing it all in one swift blow? The answer will surprise you. It all began with Cyrus the Great, a leader unlike any other. In 550 BCE, he built the Persian Empire by conquering vast lands from the Mediterranean to India. His secret? Not just military strength, but tolerance. Cyrus freed the Jews from Babylon and allowed conquered people to keep their customs. Under his rule, Persia flourished. Then came Darius I, expanding the empire even further. He built grand cities like Persepolis and ruled over millions. But ambition has its price. Darius clashed with the Greeks, planting the seeds of Persia's downfall. The real blow came with Xerxes, Darius's son. His invasion of Greece ended in disaster at the Battle of Salamis. Persia's aura of invincibility shattered. Fast forward to 330 BCE, and Alexander the Great stormed in, toppling the empire in mere years. The mighty Persian kings didn't fall to rebellion. They fell to ambition, greed, and the rise of a more determined conqueror. Their empire's rise was legendary, but its fall was inevitable. How did the Persian king
Instead of telling Khalid, okay, you've done an amazing job, all these different battles in the Riddle Wars, instead of saying, let's take a rest, let's take a break, the Khalifa Abu Bakr says, keep going. And the next thing you know, they're invading the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had existed for 1,200 years. A person living at the time, if you had said to him, the Persian Empire will end, they would have said, you're insane, that's not possible. The Persian Empire had been a global superpower for more than 1,000 years, and all of a sudden, sudden this army is invading. In the mind of the Persians are like, oh, it's an Arab raid. This is a nuisance, but let's just go quickly put it down. Khalid actually wrote the Persian general a note, a letter, said, I'm coming. But the way he wrote the letter, it made it sound like he was going to Kazima in Kuwait. On the way to the city that the Persians had as a base was right near where Basra in Iraq is. So Hormuzd takes the Persian army to go to Kazima to block his path. Khalid doesn't go to Kazima, he goes to Hufair. Word then arrives from Hormuz scouts that Khalid has gone to Hufair. Instead of telling Khalid...
Okay. So this is when we get to the conquest of Alexander the Great. So his key, they were defeated by Alexander the Great, and his key battles there were Issus in 333, interesting number, BCE, and Guagmala, I don't know if I'm saying that right, in 331 BCE. This was the fall of the other city, Persepolis, and the end of the Achaemenid dynasty. Blech. God, these words are like freaking hard to say.
Alexander the Great versus the Persian Empire. It was one man against an entire empire, and somehow he won. Darius III, the Persian king, had the numbers. His army was way bigger than Alexander's. Some say 5 times bigger, but numbers don't win battles, strategy does. Alexander knew he couldn't just charge in. Instead, he studied Darius's formation. He noticed gaps in the Persian lines, small weaknesses that he could exploit. So what did he do? He used his cavalry to draw the Persians outward, stretching their formation. Then, he sent his best troops straight through the gap toward Darius himself. Darius panicked and ran, just like he did in their last battle. And when the king runs, his army follows. The Persian forces collapsed, and Alexander won the battle and the empire. With Persia defeated, Alexander became one of the greatest conquerors in history, and all of it started with brilliant strategy and a fearless charge. Alexander the Great...
He certainly made a name for himself.
On October 1st, 331 BCE, and Alexander the Great stares across the plains of Gaugamela at what should be his death sentence. Darius III commands 250,000 Persian warriors, war elephants, and scythed chariots designed to shred infantry lines. Alexander has barely 47,000 men. But the Macedonian king has spent months perfecting something no army has ever seen, the broken wheel formation. As Darius orders his massive center forward, Alexander does the unthinkable. He deliberately opens a gap in his own phalanx, appearing vulnerable and inviting the Persians deeper. The moment Darius commits his reserves into that gap, Alexander springs his trap. His cavalry wheels right in a devastating oblique attack, striking the exposed Persian flank like a hammer on glass. The mighty Persian line doesn't bend, it shatters. In 12 minutes, the largest army the ancient world had ever assembled becomes a fleeing mob. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't numbers, it's the courage to appear weak. What forgotten tactic would you use to defeat impossible odds?
So, the fall of Babylon, the prophetic transition is sudden. So, in Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall. I don't know if you remember that story about the writing on the wall, where he sees the hand start to write on the wall in gold letters. That's the same night that Babylon fell. So, historically, that would be in year 539. And then Cyrus diverts over to the Euphrates, enters Babylon without large-scale destruction. So the prophetic framing of this is God's numbered Babylon's kingdom and gave it to the Medes and Persians. So the prophetic and symbolic significance of the book of Daniel when it comes to the history of Iran, which began as the Medo-Persian Empire, or the Persian Empire, and then became the Medo-Persian Empire. So the book of Daniel is where we see the ram with 2 horns in Daniel chapter 8, and the 2 horns represent the Medes and the Persians. The 1 horn higher was symbolizing that Persia would become more dominant. So the ram with 2 horns in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel later receives his own vision of a ram with two horns charging west, north, and south. So the interpretation given in the text is that the ram represents the kings of Medo and Persia. Like we said, the two horns, one higher than the other. Persia rises, and that's historically fulfilled in the Medes rising first. So Persia becomes dominant under Cyrus the Great, and this detail is striking because historically Media initially ruled, but then Persia took over rulership over Media peacefully and through negotiations, and Persia became the superior partner in the empire, kind of more so absorbing the Median customs and way of life and stuff like that. So the second kingdom in Nebuchadnezzar's statue in the book of Daniel is really significant because we're at the feet of in our current day, at the feet of the image, where it's a mixture of rock and clay. But we're going to watch a couple videos explaining the image and then a video on Daniel chapter 8. So let me pull those up for you.
The meaning of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the symbolism of each part from in Daniel chapter 2. 1. Head of gold symbolizes the Babylonian Empire, renowned for its opulence and prosperity under King Nebuchadnezzar's rule. 2. Chest and arms of silver represents the Medo-Persian Empire, which conquered Babylon and exerted control through economic power. 3. Waist and thighs of bronze signifies the Greek Empire, led by Alexander the Great, known for military conquests and influential culture. 4. Legs of iron depicts the Roman Empire, characterized by its strength and dominance over extensive territories. 5. Feet of iron and clay represents the modern nations of Europe.
Okay, so what he means by the modern nations of Europe, he means the United Nations that we have right now.
Symbolizing a combination of strength, weakness, and inability to achieve complete unity. 6. The rock symbolizes the kingdom of Jesus Christ, destined to overthrow and replace all earthly kingdoms.
So that would be all earthly kingdoms, proving that we cannot govern ourselves and taking over globally as a theocracy.
The meaning of King Nebuchadnezzar
under Jesus Christ. It's pretty powerful, man.
The statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represented the future of 4 empires, the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman. At one time, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that no one could interpret. So the prophet Daniel prayed and God gave him the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar's dream was about a great statue and was a prophecy about the future. In his dream, Nebuchadnezzar had seen a great statue with head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and hips of bronze, legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. Daniel explained that the statue symbolized 4 powerful kingdoms that would come before God established an eternal kingdom. The golden head was the Babylonian Empire, the silver chest was the Persian Empire, the bronze trunk was the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, the iron leg was the Roman Empire, and the feet of iron and clay are the nations that emerged with the end of the Roman Empire.
Right.
The statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represented the future.
10 toes and the mixture of rock and clay or iron and clay symbolizes just the different, United Nations, and they listed them out there for you at the end. Okay, I need food. You can tell. Here's the last.
Daniel chapter 8 presents a striking vision that has fascinated and challenged readers for centuries. The prophet Daniel sees a ram with 2 horns, symbolizing the Medo-Persian Empire, dominating the west, north, and south. Suddenly, a male goat, representing Greece, appears from the west, charging the ram with incredible speed and breaking its horns. The goat's prominent horn, symbolizing Alexander the Great, is broken at the height of its power, and 4 notable horns arise, representing the division of the Greek Empire among 4 generals after his death. Out of one of these horns grows a little horn, symbolizing a cunning, destructive king who opposes the holy people and desecrates the sanctuary. The angel Gabriel interprets this vision, emphasizing that these events pertain to the time of the end and revealing the timeline of future conflicts.
The chapter teaches the sovereignty of God over history, the rise and fall of empires, and the certainty of divine justice. Daniel 8 urges us to remain faithful, trust in God's perfect timing, and recognize that prideful power is ultimately humbled and defeated by divine authority. Sorry, this is all about Daniel chapter 8, my bad. This vision encourages perseverance and hope amid trials, reminding believers that God's plan will prevail. Daniel chapter...
All right, so Daniel chapter 2 goes over Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, his dreams of a massive statue made of 4 metals. So the head of gold being Babylon, chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia, belly and thighs of bronze is Greece, and legs of iron is Rome. So why silver? It's inferior to gold, so less centralized glory than Babylon. Dual structured, so 2 arms, Medo-Persia. So we're talking about the chest of and arms made of silver. And why silver? It's strong, but not absolute monarchy like Babylon. So the prophecy presents Medo-Persia as the second kingdom in a predetermined succession of world empires. And so now we get to the transitional empire. The bridge between Assyria and Babylon is the Medo-Persian Empire. And it was also a transitional empire before Greece. So a shift from brutal conquest model over to an administrative empire model. So why the Medo-Persian Empire matters? Because it's a model of imperial governance. It's foundational to later empires like Greek and Roman, which we'll be getting into the Greek one next week. And it shaped the Jewish Restoration period. And it also influenced religious ideas in the West, such as Christianity and customs and traditions that are tied to that. So some of those religious ideas are duality, judgment, messianism, and it was the first real global empire system. So next week we're going to cover the Greek Empire. Thank you, Kingery. I appreciate you. Yes, I am that sounds so good right now. But I did request pepperoni and cheese. So just a little summary of what we're going to do next week is the Greek transition, which is going to be the Bronze Kingdom. So we'll go back to Daniel chapter 8, and it's going to be after the ram. Daniel sees a male goat from the west moving so fast it doesn't touch the ground, with a large horn between its eyes. And the text explicitly says that the goat equals Greece and that the large horn equals the first king. And this is historically fulfilled with Alexander the Great's story. So we'll go over the speed of the conquest, which topples Darius III. And it's how Persia collapsed within a decade. How it mirrors Daniel's imagery. We're going to go over what the broken horn is, what it means having it broken at its height and 4 horns rising in its place. And then part 3 will be the civilizational shift, which it's not just political, it's philosophical. So Babylon held power as a divine monarchy. Medo-Persia held power with law and administration. And the Greek dynasty held power with philosophy, culture, and identity. And we'll go over how that's what we're learning through all this is our culture is basically a huge mixture of all of these world powers that existed before ours. So we'll learn how the Greeks didn't just conquer territory. They actually spread Hellenism. We'll go over what their language sounds like, why the transition matters. The Medo-Persian Empire acts as a stabilizing bridge, a legal empire, and a restorer to Jerusalem. And that was the prophetic second kingdom. It created infrastructure, trade routes, and cultural interconnectivity, which allowed the Greeks to spread rapidly once Persia fell. So without the Persian roads and the administrative systems, Alexander's empire would not have held so effectively with so many less soldiers. It's because of that road. So we'll go over the spiritual pattern as well in that episode. We're going to look at the sequence prophetically. Gold, Babylon, centralized power. Silver, Medo-Persia, dual structure, legal order. Greece, the bronze part of the statue, intellectual and cultural conquest. And then after Greece, we'll get into Rome, which was a militarized bureaucratic machine. And each empire becomes less about divine kingship and more about systemic power. And then as we pass Rome, a lot of the history we're familiar with is going to start coming into play in these episodes before I transition into the next mini-series, which is going to be basically a spiritual explanation of our current government and maybe exploring like other religions a bit deeper. But this is a progressive abstraction of authority that we're doing here. All right. Well, it was really good being with you guys again on a Sunday, my little intimate small crowd. But yeah, I will get back with you guys as soon as Sunday comes. And in the meantime, I'll see you guys at 9:00 every night this week, except for either Thursday or Friday I'm off. I kind of like alternate, but one of those nights I'll be off. So, all right. With that, I bid you adieu.